I want to welcome you today. I'm really grateful for everyone who's joined us. If I can get this into slideshow motion. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen? Thanks, River. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. I take that as personal privilege anytime I do a webinar is to somehow integrate the Utah One Voice Children's Choir into the webinar. So, okay. I'm going to assume that you can see my screen. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We have only an hour today with you, and I know it's your lunchtime, and I recognize that you have busy schedules and important work to do. And again, we're just really grateful to have you join us today. So we want to make good use of your time. So today's webinar, we'll be presenting the protective factor framework, so building protective factors in students, and talking about effective prevention approaches. And our learning intentions today is to introduce you to the prevention science, a little bit to prevention science and the protective factor framework that our team here, or the prevention team at USBE, has been implementing and trying to roll out in prevention work across the state for about the past 2 years. We're going to define each protective factor for you. Some of you on this webinar maybe have been exposed to the protective factor framework before, some of you may not. And so we're just going to quickly define and review those for those of you that know it and define it for those that don't. We're going to discuss how the protective factor framework can be applied to our work in education. Consider the protective factor framework in the context of a real life example. And I have a guest that will help me do that today, sort of a surprise guest for y'all. And then we'll also talk about USBE resources and further professional learning opportunities regarding the protective factor framework. All right, first I just wanted to introduce my team to you. So this is my team. You see a few of them on the webinar today. We are the prevention team. I'm the coordinator. We have a wide variety of specialists that support different work here, and you may know some of them. For full disclosure, just know that the team may look different in a few weeks. We're going through some reorganization here at USBE. And so another team will be formed, the student services team, and they'll have a coordinator, and then my team will remain the prevention team. But we will all be working using the protective factor framework in our work. And so this will still apply, but these are all the wonderful individuals that have been just ingrained in this work for the last couple of years. Okay, I wanted to start off talking a little bit about prevention science. I think probably many of you have heard this analogy of when early prevention work started, oftentimes we came at it from an approach of having the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. And then as prevention research and science started to develop, they also determined, well, we don't just need to have the ambulance at the bottom of the hill, but we also need to put the fence at the top to prevent people from falling. So I just want to share a little bit of my story as I've come into my work and into this field of helping kids and helping families and individuals. So when I first started my career, I went into social work because I, like many of you, had the desire to help impact children and make their lives better. I wanted to help with their transformation and help them be able to have just better lives overall. And when I first started working, I worked with kids in foster care. So I worked for DCFS, and that work was wonderful and it was fulfilling. But over time, I started to notice this, where working in foster care, working with kids who were in foster care was basically being the ambulance at the bottom of the hill. And so I started to have the desire and the want to be able to help with efforts to build the fence at the top. And so I started learning about prevention. And building the fence, if you will, is helping prevent kids from falling into risk behaviors. So it's changing the conditions to reduce and eliminate those risks. And that includes things like community efforts, helping families recognize those risks, and addressing hazards that are present. And so addressing those things, addressing those risks are still important, and that will always be an important part of prevention work. And it needs to be done. It needs to continually be done. But over time, the field of prevention science has also started to realize that you have to do a little bit more than just build a fence at the top of the hill. You also have to pay attention to giving kids the skills so they don't get close to the edge in the first place. And then we also know that there will always be kids that fall off the edge, no matter what you do, just because of the different conditions or characteristics. They have different characteristics or the conditions they grow up in or of their environment. And so we also need to try to give them a parachute, right? And so that's the crux of the protective factor framework. We're helping kids learn the skills not to get close to the edge, and we're also helping kids that do fall off the edge maybe have the skills to have that parachute so that they can land safely. I hope you like that analogy. So, okay, and so what we're gonna do is we're gonna delve into the protective factor framework and what it is. And the framework is something that my team over the past couple years, again, have been working to implement this. Over the next coming months of the school year, we'll be providing a webinar series to discuss how to apply the framework to prevention efforts and to any efforts working with students. And the webinar series will go over each protective factor in depth. We'll also be talking about some really big topics that people have requested us to talk about, such as suicide prevention and how to increase attendance. And hopefully we'll be providing tools and resources that will be helpful to you as you go about this work. Also in April, my team will be coming to you. We plan to be traveling to different parts of the state to hold one-day summits, if you will, regarding prevention work. And so we have identified dates and times where we'd be traveling to different parts of the state, hopefully coming closer to you so that you don't have to travel as much, and providing you with a day to really talk about this information, how to integrate it into your work. So for me, when I learned about the framework, this was the missing piece for me. So it was the parachute, because the framework is about teaching kids how to navigate those roads of life successfully. And so I was thinking about that analogy of teaching kids how to navigate the roads of life. And I wanted to ask a quick question to participants here, and you can go ahead and put your answer in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and you can share your thoughts. How do we teach prevention? What are some things we do to teach prevention? Is anyone there?
I think doing
Okay, Kendra,
social,
thank you.
yeah, doing like someone said social skills groups, but in those groups teaching coping strategies and giving them a toolbox to know when I feel this way, I can do this to help me get back in a space to learn.
Yes, absolutely. And I see in the chat we have character education, such as DBT steps, teaching social skills, teaching skills for coping, managing behaviors, replacing negative actions with positive ones. All wonderful examples of how we teach prevention. And so I was thinking about this analogy of teaching kids to navigate the roads of life, and thinking about when I taught my own children how to drive, right? And by the way, as I looked for pictures of teaching kids how to drive, a lot of the pictures came up like this, but I don't know about you, but when I taught my kid how to drive, I was mostly like that. So, and that's kind of how we are a lot of the times with the kids that we work with too. A lot of times we just have to kind of cover our eyes a little bit and hope for the best. But in our analogy, when we teach a kid how, and when we teach a youth or a student how to drive, or our own child how to drive, we don't start right away in with, this is how not to crash, right? If we start off by telling them about the hazards that they'll face on the road and how to avoid them, and then put them behind the wheel, that's probably not the best approach. There's probably some steps that you need to take before that. And So I looked up from different websites, how would you teach a student effectively how to drive a car? And these are some of the things that came up. And I kind of put them in a list here. So check you to make sure you have the right insurance. Make sure the car is in good condition. Stay calm and positive. Go over basic car functioning. Review basics of the road. Start in an empty parking lot and let them get used to the car. Provide explanations and walk them through the steps. Provide opportunities for them to practice and slowly increase the complexity. Then introduce risks and let them make safe mistakes. So those are the steps to teaching them how to drive a car. Where do you see here represented teaching them not to crash? How far down the list? Like what number? What number would you say it's represented in? 9? Yep. It does say introducing risk there. So that's a pretty easy question. So all of the things that are done before that are really creating conditions, providing knowledge, and teaching skills. So often in prevention, in the past, we've started at step 9, right? We've introduced or talked about risks. And by that time, we've sort of skipped over all of those foundational principles that we need to start with. But if you start the conversation there, you've skipped over creating the right conditions, teaching the basic skills that they need to navigate driving a car. And that's kind of how the old style was when we would talk about suicide prevention, substance use prevention, bullying prevention in their silos. It's already too late if you're just starting the conversation with suicide prevention and substance use. Yes, like the Karate Kid, learning without knowing you're learning. So kids need some basics, students need some basics before you delve into talking about those risks. And that's what the protective factor framework is about. So in order to have effective universal prevention, you need to build and strengthen protective factors and address and reduce risk factors. And starting with those protective factors is often an approach that in education is most successful. Also, effective universal prevention can be applied to all levels, right? So it can be applied to working individually with students, it can be applied to working with families, and it can also be applied in a systemic view to the whole school and community. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. So the protective factor framework, I like to, sometimes you hear this referred to as 5 to thrive. We're going to delve into each of these a little bit. And before we do, I just want to let you know that this is an evidence-based, research-informed framework. It was put together by an organization that conducted some systematic reviews. They looked at all the research and they categorized everything that successful programs were doing with youth and families in order to help them be successful in life. They took those and they also did interviews across the nation with what they called exemplary programs that were identified by people all across the nation as being successful programs. And so they took the information from the interviews and from the systematic reviews and boiled it down into this framework of 5 protective factors that have the potential to provide the most impact for strengthening families and helping children to thrive. And so this framework was first operationalized in the realm of early childhood education. Some of you may have heard of the Strengthening Families program. They really target children 0 to 5 and their parents. And they started there because they felt that's where they could get the most bang for their buck. It is starting when the kids were young. And then subsequent to that, after that program was very successful, they created what's called the Youth Thrive program. And you can find that program very easily by Googling it. But Youth Thrive was developed as an approach for working with the older youth, school-aged youth, starting at the age of 6 to 26. So protective factor approaches using this framework now span all ages. And the idea is if we go all the way up to 26, then we're influencing the next generation of parents who can then also have influence over their own children. So it's a framework, again, that's applicable to all levels of a system, policy, practice. It's being used nationally and even internationally. You hear it a lot talked about in the realm of child welfare, juvenile justice. We have medical systems applying the framework, and now we have education systems that are starting to implement it, mostly in early childhood and after school programs. And I think we in Utah are sort of on the cutting edge of this. We may be the first to really adopt the framework into our system, general education system as a whole. So that's hopefully, as we work as we continue to roll out this framework, we can find success that we can share with others. So just a few other things. I already said it's a research-based and evidence-informed. It's an approach that guides the work. It's not a new program. It's an approach. It can be easily integrated into your existing practice. And I would even say, looking at the 5, they're probably things that you're already doing in a lot of ways. So it's applicable to all levels. And by levels, I mean, if you look at MTSS, you can apply it to all 3 tiers. It's applicable to many different settings, and it can also facilitate that cross-sector work with child welfare and juvenile justice, and doctors and pediatricians and things like that. So because it provides a common language with reference points for everyone. Those who are familiar with the framework and integrated into their work, if they were to come to you and say, I think we need to build social connections in this child, everybody knows what everyone's talking about when we use that same kind of language. And then the framework is adaptable to individuals, communities, and systems work, like we already discussed. And the other thing I wanted to make sure to mention is that the protective factor framework is grounded in a strength-based approach. So the framework really is most effective when we can look at the strengths of a student and utilize those into the approaches that we're utilizing with the student. So, for example, if we recognize that the student does a really good job at advocating for themselves, then we'll take that strength and integrate it into other ways to help that student achieve and excel. So it's really grounded in noticing the strengths of a student and elevating those strengths to help them achieve success. It's also very relationship based. It's very trauma informed in that way, saying that relationships are very important to this process. It encourages us to make small but significant changes to our everyday actions, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. It increases collaboration. It really encourages including parents, because parents have a great amount of influence over their children and how their children succeed, especially in education. And it's multifaceted and not mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is, the cool thing about protective factors is when you build one, you more than likely influence and build other protective factors as well. So just focusing and concentrating on one protective factor can actually increase others. Okay, let's delve in. So we'll go first into concrete supports. Before I go there, are there any questions before I go into that? Strength-based helps with buy-in because we all like to focus on what we're good at. Yes, definitely. And being strength-based does not come naturally to us as humans. It's actually very hard for us to make that switch sometimes and see the strengths in students rather than the deficits. And I know that there's been a lot of talk and activity and research around being asset-based in education, and it sort of parallels that same type of approach that we're not we're not just focusing on the deficits, but we're also utilizing those strengths. So thanks for that, River. So let's go into concrete supports. So we're going to talk about the conditions, the knowledge, and the skills that the protective factor framework helps us with. So you can see that concrete supports is talking about basic needs being met. The skill that it's talking about is helping students seek help and seeing that as a strength, helping them do self-advocacy and helping them see that as a strength rather than a weakness. And when those things are done, the result is that it minimizes the stress, time, and focus it takes to obtain those, to get those needs met. And so when we talk about concrete supports, we're talking about food, clothing, shelter, sleep, healthcare, and most importantly, a safe school environment. So this is where school climate efforts come into play. So moving on, what schools can do to build concrete supports in time of need? Well, I think that you all know that you have a lot of things that you can do and already do to help build concrete supports in students. Free and reduced lunch is a great example. Teen centers is a good example. So what schools can do is provide resources to help students and families access supports as needed. So through social workers, through school counselors, through providing referrals to families and kids to get their needs taken care of. That's one thing that schools can do to build concrete supports. We can create a culture where help seeking is a strength. This is an important part of concrete supports. And also be deliberate in teaching and helping students practice skills of self-advocacy, building that into our day. And so there's a great example in Clearfield High. Do we have anyone here from Clearfield High? I don't know if we do, but I just want to show there's this video that I found in preparing for today that really shows how one school is working on concrete supports. And hopefully you can hear this. Oops. Let me try this again.
Hi, my name is Jenica Whitworth. I'm the Teen Center Director here at Clearfield High School. So when you come to Clearfield High School, the Teen Center is located in what the students call the old gym. When they have the needs, students will be able to work it into their schedule. They can talk to their counselor about it, or they can talk to a teacher and see if there's a class period that will work for them to be able to come in. The students will come in, we'll greet them, and then decide what their need is. We're also going to have resources for them to learn how to make their own resumes, to do college applications, and learn how to advocate for themselves as they go into adulthood.
We know that when students don't have their basic needs met, then they oftentimes don't attend school. So this facility will allow for students to come in during or after school hours, get a great shower, launder their clothes, catching up with homework, or working on mindfulness strategies that will make them successful in school. The reason that this project was able to happen was because of our great leadership and partnership at Clearfield City. They are the major contributors and the backers to this project. Along with them, we've had many incredible other partners, such as VCBO and our engineering team, who donated services and resources so that we could get this project up and going.
So we took this, what used to be an old locker room, and we transformed it into this teen center. We used a lot of exciting subdued materials. The tile people donated a lot of tile, and the carpet guy donated the carpet, and VCBO, we donated our time, because we really felt that this was an incredible, amazing project to help some of the students that don't have the same advantages.
We have had people show up with donations, and again, I should mention Mark Shepard and Clearfield City. Without them, this wouldn't happen, but individual citizens and citizen groups have showed up with just so much generosity as they've heard about what this center is for, and they want to help. When students come back to Clearfield High, they're going to remember how they were treated and what was available to them, that they had what they needed at Clearfield High School, and that they'll remember the relationships and the support that they had that helped them be successful.
Okay, I don't know if you all saw, but Jenica's here with us today, and Jenica, is it okay if I put you on the spot a little bit? Shanika's in that video.
Yeah, that's great.
Hey, I'm so
Hi.
glad you're here with us. Hey, I want to ask you a question. How is having that teen center impacted the students and your community?
Well, really great. So that video, you can see we were masked in that video. So that was in April of 2021. And since then, we've been able to open, we're going to have 11 teen centers in all of our high schools and our alternative schools in Davis School District. And yeah, the impact has been great. We are seeing more engagement from students, from them being able to come and have a place where they can access the resources, where before simple things such as like feminine hygiene, students would have to leave for the day. But because of these teen resource centers, students are able to come access the resources. They're really quite efficient in the fact that it's a space within the school that already existed that was maybe outdated or underutilized. So yeah, great impact, great use. We have a great school board here in Davis School District that has completely supported, and we've been able to expand over the past 4 years.
Thank you so much for sharing and letting me put you on the spot. I'm wondering if
Of
you
course.
have anything to show maybe attendance has been increased because of these teen centers.
Yeah, we have some data that we're running, and it's kind of a long data set for attendance and for student achievement as far as them graduating and the rates of student populations being impacted. And so, yeah, we're running that data, and it's been really positive impacts for everybody.
Thank you so much. So a great example in Clearfield High with Jenica about how they're working on concrete supports, and it is helping so much their student community, as well as, I'm guessing, their greater community as well. That was not planned, folks. Thanks, Jenica, for being willing to do that.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to knowledge of development, so we can move along a little bit here. These are the conditions, knowledge, and skills that come along with building a knowledge of development. So we're talking about creating realistic expectations for students, helping students understand their own brain development and the effects of trauma, helping those serving children, so your staff, understand the developmental needs and strategies that support those students, how trauma affects brain development, and that bad behavior does not equal a bad kid, right? So that's a huge thing. And then building policies and systems that recognize that children have strengths, not just deficits. So we already talked about being asset-based and strength-based. So that's a knowledge of development, and what schools can do in this realm, a lot, but some of the examples of what they can do is help parents and teachers understand child development in age-appropriate behaviors. We can implement policies and procedures that support a deep understanding of child and adolescent development and create a trauma-sensitive school environment. How many of you have participated in any type of professional learning or development around child development issues since you've been working in the education field? I'm interested to know. Has anyone? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, so this is one of the interesting things that, oh, River, you have. Have you participated? Do you guys do this on a regular basis? Is this something that you integrate into your professional learning? Okay, great. So across the board, as I'm talking to educators about the framework and we talk about knowledge of development, it's been very few and far between where I've seen examples of schools or districts that have implemented this type of learning in for their teachers. And imagine how helpful it would be if, like, say, we got all the 4th grade teachers together and talked about the developmental issues of the students in their class and helped them understand how those students like their normal development and what are some of the issues with students. For example, we know that students can't understand sarcasm until they reach the age of about 10 or 11, I think is what the research shows. And so it's probably important for 4th grade teachers to understand that, that their 4th grade students may not be to the point where they understand sarcasm. So those are the types of things that are helpful. I don't I have a couple of examples: professional learning opportunities for staff, parent nights focusing on developmental issues, teaching kids about brain development. We see this a lot when people talk about Dan Siegel's hand model. Some people teach about the window of tolerance. I'm wondering, what else have you done at your school to teach about a knowledge of development, either to your staff or to your students? River says that it's taught by your SEL staff. That's really great. Wonderful to hear. And part of faculty PD. All right, so if you can think of any, put those in the chat and I'd love to hear them. And then we'll move on quickly to social connections. And social connections is pretty self-explanatory, right? And we all know how important it is that we provide opportunities for students to develop healthy, appropriate connections. So the conditions, knowledge, and skills that you need is helping kids have multiple friendships, supportive relationships with their peers as well as adults, helping them feel respected and appreciated and a sense of belonging. Again, helping them ask for help and accept help, and give help to others. So that's an important part of developing social connections and developing skills for establishing and maintaining those connections. So if we can integrate ways into the curriculum to help them feel and learn those knowledge and skills, then we're building social connections. So again, what schools can do: help students develop social skills necessary for forming and sustaining healthy development, healthy relationships, facilitate opportunities for students to develop healthy relationships, and create a culture of school connectedness. As I was doing research for this, I also found a really great video of an example of this that I'll share with you really quickly. If my mouse will go.
Every student walks through the door wanting to feel valued. Every child deserves to have at least one adult in this building who knows them by name. We want 100% of our students to feel connected to a teacher in our building, and that's our goal. It was just a matter of, how do we measure this? Early in the year, we conduct a teacher-student connection poster activity so that we can determine which students we've connected with and which students we need to work toward connecting with.
Delaney is allergic to red food dye.
Yeah.
And she also has a pond that she swims in.
We take their whole roster of students, we put it up on a wall, and we ask teachers to go through by name and face. Yep, I know this one, this one, this one.
Know them all?
I do. All by name and face, man. I think that was a team goal by the end of the second week.
What?
Yeah.
End of week 2.
The activity was based around how well do you know your students. Just through this simple, adding a check mark next to the kid's name that you know by name and face, and then the other categories, academic status, and then a more in-depth personal story about them. She's one that slips under the radar, though. She's pretty quiet. You look at a lot of kids and you go, hey, this student has one check mark. I know them by name and face, but other than that, I don't know where they're at academically. I don't know anything about their personal life. It's probably harder for them to feel valued in a learning environment without that connection to the teacher. So to me, that's what this was all about, a reflective process. How well are we getting to know our kids?
And so you don't get to know those students.
The stones in the river, that's what I like to call them. They're just letting the water wash over them. We gotta go pick up that stone and turn it over.
We want them to reflect, and then it's time to develop an action plan. What are we going to do to make sure that these students are taken care of?
We have personal conversations with our students in the hallways during passing time.
We also do things like Thumbs Up Thursdays or Feel Good Fridays, and we just take a few seconds to have kids share things that they're proud of.
To get to know the kids a little bit better on a personal level, just asking them a simple question as they come in the door. Example, last week I started off by just asking kids what their favorite food or fruit was. And then those questions can get deeper to try and get, a little more personal with them. Winter. What is it? Summer? Nice. The students here should be seen as people and not just pupils. The more valued they are for their individuality, the more successful they're going to be in the classroom, the more risks they're going to be willing to take, and that's awesome.
We have seen a huge increase in our students' connection to school, with their connection to the teachers, and I think that's probably the most joy teachers have in their profession. Then the real work can begin.
That's a great example of how we can implement specific initiatives to make sure that we have connections to students in our school. Has anyone integrated or implemented something similar in your school or district? And to your question, Nicole, yes, we'll send out the PowerPoint after today, and I'll be happy to share that link. Not seeing any. I would just love to hear if anyone has had experience with doing something similar to this, where we're looking at every single individual student and making sure that there's some adult in the building that knows something about them, that has a connection, that they have a connection to an adult. And each person takes students to ensure they connect with them. Yes. Yes, we have done that. Oh, good, Dammy. We'd love to hear more about that at some point. So this is how we can specifically build social connections in students. And you can see why it makes such a difference in their learning, in their ability to achieve academically. Okay, got 2 more left. So resilience, we'll move to resilience. What the conditions, knowledge, and skills are for that is the skills to manage stress and function well when faced with stressors, challenges, and adversity. A lot of people talk about resilience as bouncing back from difficulties. It's building hope and a sense of optimism for the future, helping students learn how to manage stress and enhance student wellness, self-care and problem-solving skills, and a growth mindset in the classroom and school environment. And I also want to add that a key part of building resilience for students is building resilience in the adults that serve them as well. Oh, you're not seeing the slideshow. Let me stop sharing and try that again. Do you see it now?
We can see it. It's just not in slideshow view.
Oh,
it's just that we can see the bar on the side, but not really a big deal.
Got it. Good point. Okay. And now I lost, bear with me for 1 second. Oh, I can't see you guys. Okay, so let's see. There we go. So when we build these things and also build them in the adults that serve students, then we build conditions for resilience across the school and across the district. So what schools can do to help with this? Well, there's a lot of things, and there's been a lot of activities and a lot of information and research coming out about how we can build resilience in students. But integrating a strength-based approach into the school culture, like we talked about, noticing strengths, and integrating that into our culture and climate can help students develop a resilient mindset, helping them see that mistakes are a part of the learning path, right? Working with students to develop their plans for the future also builds their resilience, helping them develop that optimism that they have goals for the future that they can achieve. All of that is a part of building resilience. And also doing that in your staff as well. So resilience wellness initiatives for staff, creating a culture of growth mindset in your school. There are many resources out there that talk about building resilience in students. I found way too many. I couldn't narrow it down when I was preparing this to be able to show you just one. But what have you done in your school to build resilience in students?
One example is having a student give a list what they're grateful for at the beginning of every day to help build that resiliency in that student.
Absolutely. Building gratitude and helping them see that they have things in their life to be grateful for and things worth, going forward for. That does help build resilience. Thanks for that example, Kendra. And that's something very simple that can be done at the beginning of the day. So great example. Okay, last but not least, cognitive, social, and emotional competence. And this one, we are in the business of cognitive competence in education. So we spend much of our time, energy, and focus on building the cognitive competence of students. And what I mean by that are those higher executive functioning skills like problem solving, goal setting, helping them to develop those things that will help them achieve academic success. And what a lot of times people forget is that it's really difficult for students to learn unless they can also be socially emotionally regulated. So create a culture where both cognitive competencies and social emotional competencies are valued and important. And I am very aware that that's a struggle in today's atmosphere. There's a lot of talk out there about how those things don't, they don't belong in schools maybe, but we need to help parents and educators and people understand that it's really hard, again, for students to learn. You need both sides of that equation. So skills such as communication, emotion regulation, empathy, setting and achieving positive goals, making responsible decisions, and self-advocacy all play into that cognitive and social emotional competency. And the adults need to be able to model those competencies in order to teach it to students. Julie says we do SEL lessons every Thursday in our advisory class. Most topics cover resiliency. Thanks for that. And so, by the way, again, just as a reminder, as you're building resiliency, you're most likely building other of these protective factors. So what schools can do, understand and emphasize skills that build both cognitive and social emotional competencies, integrating SEL into the classroom. We do have some trainings at USPE where we can provide some ideas for that. But if we're integrating that into the core curriculum, then that's been shown to be the most effective way. And then incorporate direct and indirect instructional opportunities for students to learn and practice those skills. And I think a lot of schools are already doing those initiatives. So examples, academic supports for students is an example of building cognitive competency. Personalized competency-based learning initiatives, they cover both cognitive competency and social emotional competency. We're providing individualized supports for students. Initiatives that integrate SEL into the classroom, adult SEL initiatives, school improvement and staff efficacy, because those things are building cognitive competency in your staff and improving the social emotional competency of everyone. Restorative practices is a great example of a strategy that can build cognitive and social emotional competence, as well as trauma sensitive school initiatives. So a lot of the initiatives that we're already doing, what we say is that they're basically vehicles to building protective factors. So again, a lot of this work is being done, and it's just a matter of being able to see it through the lens of the framework. And what I mean by that is when we're working with students or when we're having systemic efforts, we need to pay attention to what protective factors are we good at building and what protective factors maybe we need to work on. So that's how the framework can help. So before we, in order to go a little bit more deeper and show you how this might work in a real life context or how it might have helped, I've brought a guest along with me today, and this is, some of you may know her or recognize her. This is my good friend, Deandra Brown. Deandra, I'm going to ask you to turn on your camera and come off mute. I'm going to introduce you to, I've become in a very short time pretty good friends with Deandra. I love her to death. For those of you that don't know, she's a concert pianist with the musical group, the Five Browns. She and her siblings have performed together for over 20 years at elite venues across the world. They've recorded 8 albums together. But her personal experiences with child abuse have led her to advocating for victims of child abuse and sexual violence. Her work and perspective have led to the passage of nearly 24 bills in Utah, and she's a strong believer in prevention efforts. And she partners with us through our prevention efforts with Prevent Child Abuse Utah. She co-chairs several coalitions and is the program administrator currently for the Utah Family Strengthening Network. And we'll talk a little bit more about her work in a second, but she's a big fan and one of the trainers of the Protective Factor Framework. So Deandra,
hello.
There.
I am. Thanks for having me today, everyone.
So great to have you join us. Thank you so much. So, oh, I was going to show your video, but I think we're running a
That's okay.
little behind. But I can send that out to all the participants. There's just a short clip. Deandra and her family have put together, there's a documentary out that kind of shows a little bit about their story. But I'm wondering, Deandra, if you can just talk a little bit about how protective factors showed up for you and also maybe did not show up for you in your life and in your situation.
Well, one of the things that gets me most excited about this work with protective factors and seeing the progress that we're making already is really because it's sort of different from the way that I grew up. And there's so many things that I look back on now as I'm a parent myself, things that people could have done, that people could have said, the circle around me of trust that could have been built out, all those kinds of things that I really do feel like would have helped me to really navigate a very troubling home. I grew up in a home where we were told not to let anybody in or to share any aspects of our life with them. We were taught not to trust people. And so because of that, I think, society has.
Uh-oh, did we lose her?
Me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
Sorry, to really acknowledge those families that may be, in a situation where they're not super visible and there's isolation, and really making sure that we are that support that those children need to have a sense of belonging and to feel like they're not alone.
So if an adult or multiple adults in your in your environment had specifically helped you to increase any of these 5 protective factors in your life, how do you think that would have affected you, or what would that have been like for you?
Well, quite honestly, I think it would have made all the difference in the world. As I touched on just briefly, those social connections would have been pivotal for me. I was the typical shy child that many of you have probably seen come through your classrooms and through your doors. I really didn't ever feel comfortable raising my hand or sharing my opinions. So I think having a solid social connection circle would have really helped. Resources that you touched on, Tanya, I think would have been huge. A quick little story. I was one of those teens that really didn't feel comfortable sharing some of my dark turmoil with people. And I remember long time ago in the 90s, picking up a phone book and looking for a helpline and calling anonymously and asking what to do if somebody felt like they were nobody cared about them, and if they were debating about ending their life, stuff that I don't share super commonly. But these are real things that the teens and the children that are coming through your doors are dealing with. And I remember being afraid and scared. And so the effects that you can have on those children that come through your doors, you just can never discount the fact that you're seeing them every day. You could be that that person that quite literally saves their lives.
Yeah, and Tabitha put a question in the chat, Deandra, she specifically for you. She said, how could adults in the building overcome the mistrust that was taught or ingrained in the home? What's tips for helping them combat that with their students?
I think it's really important to be there and to be visible, to build up those trust factors, right? Not to just pop in and out of a child's life. And I know that's difficult when you've got sometimes hundreds, even more children that you're responsible for, but having them see you regularly, not diving into the deep stuff right away, but having this communication and this friendship that builds over time. I am certain that if I had had a teacher that I knew cared about me, that saw me as a person, as a student, more than just a student, but as a person, and really took the time to dive a bit deeper, I'm pretty certain I would have shared with them some of the troubling things that were going on that I didn't even know weren't normal at the time of regular growing up in family atmospheres.
Yeah, that's so important. Thanks for sharing that. And I also think, like, if you had people specifically talking to you about how asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. We see you, we care about you. Like, those things maybe would have made a difference for you and your siblings.
You're so right, Tanya. And one of the things that I've realized it's sometimes we get ourselves wrapped up in knots about like saying the right thing or doing the right thing, but it's your presence, it's your consistency, it's your kindness that exudes from you that kids really pick up on, and it can make all the difference in the world.
That's beautiful and amazing. So why do you think that it's important for educators to know about the framework? And can you talk about some ways you think that they can effectively integrate it into their work with students?
Absolutely. So never minimize the effects that you can have on your students. I'm certain that you go home lots of days and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I made any headway with anybody in my class today, but your consistency, your kindness, it speaks volumes. So even those baby steps that you're taking every day are having huge impacts. And you are partners with parents. I have the opportunity now to be a parent myself, and my husband and I have a 13-year-old daughter, as you can see, who sometimes participates in that. One of those photos that Tanya put up participates in some of my advocacy work. And her teachers, like, we are a team. We've talked about it. Their involvement, they see her more hours in the day than I do. And it's important to do whatever you can to try to reach out to those parents. I know it's tricky and sometimes parents are pretty standoffish, but to let them know that you're actually here to help. And as you said, Tanya, the help seeking is not a negative thing. It actually can lead to wonderful things. And it means that you honestly want to do better, whatever that you can. You are those lifelines for the students in your circles.
Deandra, thanks so much for being here today. And folks, I brought her on because she has such a passion for this work, just like I do. She's been embedded in a lot of the policy work that we've been doing around bringing visibility to the framework and how important it is, and helping provide some of the training. So Deandra, maybe you can talk a little bit about what you feel are the next important steps in implementing protective factors into schools systemically, or just into teachers in their regular classroom. And also maybe we can also touch on the trainings that your team can provide.
Well, one of the things, as I stated off the top, I get really excited about the fact that Utah's sort of leading out in some ways by implementing this in our schools, the places where you wonderful people are seeing the children come through your doors day in and day out. So I look forward to continued steps of us really growing this systemically, where people shift their lens and their view to not just notice the red flags. Yes, of course, those are important to understand and to see, but to really focus on the positives, the things that we know that those families are doing well, and build upon from there. So I get very excited about this work of strengthening families and the protective factors. I have the opportunity to be the project administrator for the Utah Family Strengthening Network, and we have specific trainings for educators, all of you, counselors, staff, anyone who's associated with the K through 12 students in education system. We have a specific protective factors for educators course for you that we've partnered directly with Tanya and her team at USBE to really offer you a step-by-step guide to how you can better implement these in your classrooms, in your school environments, to really help jumpstart and continue the systemic change. So I know Tanya is going to put up some information that can help you to register for these trainings, because we are partnering with Tanya and her team at USBE. These courses are free for all of you within the education spectrum. So we would love more than anything to continue this movement and to really have your efforts as a team as we work together to change the lives of families across the state.
Thank you so much. So yeah, and just wanted to reemphasize that we've partnered with them, meaning we have purchased their services, and so you can participate in those trainings free of charge, and they can come to schools and to districts and provide that training. And we want to get the word out, because that we have a short period of time that we can have them helping us, and I just want to make sure that we leverage this. During the training, it's a 6-hour training. They go into depth about each of the protective factors and talk a little bit more to get people thinking about how you can integrate it into your work. It's a really great training. You can see on this slide where you can sign up. You can go to that pcautah.org. /UFSN and sign up if you're interested. Reach out to your administrators if you're interested in bringing it to your district or to your school. And so I just wanted to make sure we mentioned that that's a resource for you. We also, on the prevention team, we have some information about the framework on our USBE website, prevention website. And we're in the midst right now of putting together a toolkit. So my team and I have been for months working on a toolkit, and I'm just going to quickly show you an example of social connections, what it would include. I'm still sharing, right? Okay. So here's an example of what we call one of the toolkit cards, and what it will include. It includes the what is social connections? Why is social connections important? How can social connections be embedded into your work is school-wide, as well as in the classroom. So for specific teachers, how they can implement social connections or strategies to build social connections in their classroom. And then what should we look for in students? What can we, in some reflection questions, and my favorite part is the Go Deeper resources. That's there for you. I know you all have not a lot of time, but lots of resources that we're trying to include there so that you can go deeper into any of these subjects. So that toolkit will be made available to you when it's ready to go out. We're getting it formatted right now. And anyone who's interested in that, just watch for an email to come out on the prevention listserv. If you're not a member of that, you can sign up on our website. You can reach out to me or any one of my team to get access to that, or ask, when is that coming? When is that going to be ready? And so we have 2 minutes. I want to open it up for questions. That's all I prepared for you today. Just a quick overview. And then remember, in the coming months, we're going to have more webinars to go into depth and go into the toolkit. Are there any questions? I'm happy to stay and answer those. And if not, I want to get you out of here on time, maybe even a minute early. Thank you so much for being here today. And here's my information if you want to reach out to me.
Anya, we did have a question in the chat.
Okay.
The question is the 6-hour training different than the webinar series, the information they'll be learning in the webinar series?
Yes, it is very much different. In the webinar series, we plan to mostly go over the toolkit and to go into each of the different protective factors in the frame of the toolkit. The training is really just it's an overview that goes deeper into each protective factor. So they are different. And I also want to mention, we have an evaluation that we'll be sending out for you from today's webinar, because again, we want to make sure that these are worth your time and valuable, and that we improve them for the future. So just get your feedback. So thank you all for being here, and we'll stick around for a minute for questions, and have a wonderful day if you're gonna hop off. I hope you have time to get some lunch.